Welcome to another installment of Hilchos Basar B'Chalav. We are progressing through the rules of the Kachal, of the Udder, and we are going to wrap it up today with a discussion about the last couple of things to resolve here regarding the salting and the soaking and the roasting of the Kachal. The last couple things here to discuss in Gimel and in Daled, and we are in chapter Tzadi, we're in number 90, and we are in Sifim Gimel and Daled. We have a couple other things to figure out over here, and then we wrap up Siman Tzadi, and we can move on to Tzadi Aleph, where I'm sure a lot of you are excited to learn about those things. Excuse me. So, the question is there any concern about leaving the milk inside of the udder to the next day? So we mentioned when we went over the halacha that there isn't a concern. So the question is, what happens if you did leave it in there? So we mentioned it briefly. But let's go through the sources about leaving the milk inside the udder when it's been more than 24 hours. So the Gemara says that the halacha is in Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we discussed this a while ago, that Moliach is Gerseach and Kavush Kimavushal, right? That's the main of Shmuel, that putting salt on stuff makes it like a roasting experience, so it should absorb some of the flavor, and letting these things soak in liquid is the same thing as like cooking it in liquid. It should be a problem. Okay? So when it comes to our case of Kachal, the Sefer Isser V'Heter HaAruch, okay, which is also quoted in the Sefer Torah's Chatas of the Ramah, says that our case is Chal of Shchuta, and therefore there was no Gezerah on this. We mentioned this last time briefly. We're going to look at it now. Is this going to apply only when it's inside of the animal, or what happens if when we slice it and dice it and smash it against the wall? What happens to it then? Okay, so there's actually a machlokes. So the Sefer Isser V'Heter, quoted by the Torah's Chatas, he says that that if you take the chal, if you take the milk out of the kachal and soak it in that's going to be prohibited. So he limits his own permission. So the Taz quotes this, and this is a Taz in Sifkatan 12, number Yud Beis, and he says that this seems a little bit strict. Okay. So why would it matter if it's inside of it or outside of it? We still say it's chal of shchuta. That's the milk that comes from an animal that was slaughtered. And the prohibition is only a restriction, okay? And so too is soaking. It was also a rabbinic restriction. So this is not going to keep you away from the prohibition of basar b'chalav. That is not what the Torah prohibited anyway. So it's only it's only prohibited if you actually cooked it. So I don't understand why this is the case. And we reiterate such a statement that Taz explains in Siman Kufay in 105. And so this would be considered technically a gzera l'gzera, that no one makes a enactment top of an enactment, except when it comes to separating food on the table. That's an exception. But in most other cases, we don't do that. Okay? So that's the Taz. He doesn't understand why you would do that. The Minchas Yaakov, okay, a commentary on the Torah's Chatas. So he writes that there are other Rishonim that say that based on that the rules for the liver and for the udder is that they prohibit other meat when they cook them with them. And that even includes kvisha, right, to soak it with them. And the Minchas Yaakov expands on this and says that the Taz obviously didn't see this. So other people said that this must have been his problem. The Shach disagrees with the Taz as well, that we do make a gzera, okay, as I kind of quipped, okay, and so he disputes it. And so therefore the Pri Chadash, the Minchas Yaakov, and other people all say that the Taz is wrong, and Aruch Shulchan as well. Begel Mervava makes an interesting quip on this Taz. He says, so according to the Taz, when you have chicken, okay, that's the Rabbanon, then that shouldn't be prohibited for malicha and for soaking either. When you salt it or when you soak it in milk, it shouldn't be prohibited. And the Gemara itself says that in the case of Hahu bar Gozala, the nafal lekada de kamcha, right? A little pigeon that falls into the dairy dip. Okay? So Rav Chanina permitted that. Okay? So Rava then asked the questions, who would permit such a thing? Well, of course, Rav Chanina. He's awesome like that. Okay? So why? So because they explain in the Gemara later on about Shmuel, when Shmuel said that salting is like roasting, that means that it has to be something that is so salty it's inedible at this point because there's so much salt on it. And this dip, however, is not so salty. We like the salt in it. It's just enough to give us some flavor. Okay, so Rav Chanina permitted it because it's permitted based on the fact that it wasn't so salty. So he points that out as well, that there's reasons to be lenient like that. Rabbi Akiva Eger also comments on this Taz. Okay, he says, so when there's permission, and we're talking about the small piece of chicken falling into this, he says that it's because there's not that much salt in it. Okay, but you have to also cook it to reduce the power of the salt. And whatever salt is in there, it's not so strong. Okay? And if we had a heftier meat, like beef, that wouldn't be a problem. Okay? But in such a case, if we were to cook them together, of course, there would be a Torah prohibition. So therefore, when we had a case of where we took chicken in there, right, because it's bird meat, there might be an Issur Rabbanan, okay? And so therefore, when we say that it has to be salty, it means that it has to be salty and then cooked. Okay? So that's his argument. And he also says that you can't serve on the same table chicken and cheese in the same table either. So he says that's clearly a gzera. Okay? So that's basically what it comes out to. Okay, and there's also Chassam Sofer who says something very similar, that these cases are all very similar. Okay? Now, that's for that case. So what about if you salted it and then let it sit? Okay, so we mentioned that. So if you went ahead and salted the kachal for instead of roasting it, you wanted to cook it, and you forgot to take out the milk, and you made it very salty. So in that case, that would be a case of very salty milk, and that's mentioned. We're going to see that later on in peites. That's super salty and would therefore be a problem. Okay. He also says that if you didn't salt it and then you soak it with the stuff in it, you would have a problem because the blood would get into the milk as well, and then that would then prohibit it as well. So it doesn't matter whether you're soaking it in milk or water, since in peites we say you're soaking it. Okay. However, the Aruch Shulchan disagrees with this statement, because the difference is that the milk is not really water. That's what it comes down to. So the Issur Heter was trying to say is because the Torah basically permitted this stuff and is not treating it like water, to say that it's going to absorb the stuff onto it and put it into something else. It's not considered milk, it's considered junk. Okay? And therefore the Madneh Shulchan says, are we actually even worried about this opinion about him? And he seems to say that no, it's not. It's just sort of like there, and therefore if it's not so obvious, it's not going to be prohibited. Okay. So the Ramah mentions this, and he says that if you leave the kachal alone before roasting it, and you let it soak with its milk in it for one day, it's permitted. Okay? And he quotes that, and there's nobody who really disagrees with that. Okay? So, however, the Aruch Shulchan says that even though that's what he says, he doesn't mean that. He means don't actually let it stay there. The Taz his understanding of the Isser of that Isser V'Heter quoted by the Ramah, is that he says that when you let it sit there, is that the reason why it's permitted is because it's not really food. Okay, he says nonetheless, I really don't believe that was the intent to permit soaking this meat with the milk from after the shechita, right after it's been killed. So even though it's only prohibited rabbinically, we don't feel that this actually should be permitted. So he's not really sure why, and he's just confused by that. The Pri Megadim adds on this and says that the halacha, even though the Taz has his issues with it, he feels it shouldn't be the case. It should be the case. His assessment of the Taz is not to worry about the Taz, neither this way nor that way, and that's his assessment with it. So that's the final assessment. So even though the Taz has his own approach to it, yes, many people say we do make a gezerah with gezerah, and no, we don't prohibit it in this case, and not for the reasons mentioned by the Taz. Okay. However, interestingly enough, the Ramah does say later on in Siman Kufay, quoting the Isser V'Heter Aruch, he says that if you're not sure if you left something soaking in a liquid, it's prohibited. He said, however, when meat is soaked in milk, we are lenient because it's only a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, so therefore, if you don't know if the kachal was soaked in the stuff in it, therefore it's also safek d'Rabbanan. Okay, so that's an interesting thing over here. The Pesach Tshuva here adds something else. He says that if you left the kachal with other meat, that they're all soaking together, and they were all salted together, and they're starting to collect some of the juices from the salting. There might be a problem with the chal of shchuta in that case. Okay, so that might be an issue. So that's something to consider as a potential problem. Now, what about roasting the kachal and salting it? Let's finish up that part of it. Okay, so the Gemara says, we brought it before in Kuf Yud Aleph, that you're allowed to have the kachal away from the other meat, so that if the meat's on top and the kachal is on the bottom, that's okay, because it flows away from it. But if on the top of it, that's no good, because you'll see the milk drip on top of the meat. We don't like that, and that's a rabbinic prohibition. And then we saw Rav Dimi, he flips it, he says it's the other way around because it doesn't absorb while it's busy doing this, doing that. So Rashi says that no matter how we do it, since we take our meat and we turn it sideways, therefore there should be a problem no matter what's going on, whether the kachal is on the left side of the meat or the right side of the meat, on top, on bottom, no good. Okay, so we said that's the problem. So now let's apply that to salting it. Okay, does that apply the same thing? So we see in another Gemara in Chulin, this is on Sadi Zayin, talking more about roasting it. So it says a very large piece of meat that was salted in the Reish Galusha's house. It was a very large piece of meat. So Ravina said that it has to be prohibited. Okay, but Rav Acha bar Rav was permitted it. Okay, so then they went and they asked the question to Mar bar Rav Ashi, and they said, "What did your father do?" And he said, "My father permitted this." And then they asked Rav Acha bar Rav, and he says, "Oh, then why would you say this?" So what's the issue? If it's based on the fact that salting is like roasting and soaking is like cooking, so that's only when we're cooking it, but not when it's being roasted, because if it's roasting, you can go ahead and slice it all off. So the problem over here was they left the gita nasha inside of it, and so if you just take that out, then the rest of the animal is going to be fine about that. And the Rashba says, based on this case, is that the rule of salting it is the same as the rule of roasting it, and also the rule is just by roasting, when you salt it, if you have other meat there, that you should have the kachal on the bottom and the meat on top. Okay, if you went and did it the other way, that's a problem. Okay, and Beis Yosef quotes this in our siman to basically say that that's the halacha, and the Gra agrees the same way. Okay, so according to the Rashba, the salt basically keeps the milk away from the rest of the stuff. Okay, that's the Rashba's opinion. The Rosh says that if you're salting meat with kachal, the problem is you want to keep you're actually not going to run into this problem. The Rashba says, and even if the salting causes the milk to get absorbed into the kachal itself, that is considered chalav shchuta still, and not a problem. Okay, and the Reini Yerucham says that as well. Now the Beis Yosef says that even though that the Rosh gives permission to do this, he says that you need to really have two things. You have to have the salt both exuding the milk, and that the chalav is not being absorbed into it. So according to the Rosh, the salt can only do one thing. Okay, and it can't be going into the meat as well. The difference between the Rashba and the Rosh basically is that if you're going to go ahead and permit them to be soaked in salt together, the whole point is that you hadn't ripped open the kachal and gotten all the milk out, so you salted it anyway. So the Shach says, this is in Sif Katan 26, that according to the Rosh, one is allowed to go ahead and do that. However, according to the Rashba, you would still need to go ahead and try to get the milk out, and it's best not to do it together. Okay. So could the salt really do that? So the Pesach Yeshuva asked that question, and he quotes the Pri Megadim on here that salt doesn't really do that with milk. Okay, it only seems to be this leniency by kachal. But if the kachal absorbs any milk inside of it, then that's going to be a problem when you're salting the whole thing. So you really need to slice it open, according to that opinion. The Darchei Moshe brings a Sefer HaAruch, where he says, that when you are salting it, you treat it just like roasting it, and you need to slice it open. Okay? And if you didn't, it's prohibited. So that's what he says. So he disagrees with that Rosh. And so, however, you can rely on the Rosh from the Rambam b'diavad. So even though Tosfos and the Rosh are, they say a different rule by roasting than they do by salting. So because the Rosh says that it's different. So in a great need, you could really be lenient. It seems to be okay. So the way we look at it is like this. So the Rashba says that the salt is going to put the milk inside of it, okay, and therefore you have to put it away from the other meat, and you can't roast with the other meat. However, if you did, it's going to be mutter. The Rosh says you can go ahead and put them together, and if they are the same, it's also going to be permitted. And the Isser V'Hetar Aruch, quoted in the Ramah, says that if you don't slice open the kachal to go ahead and get the milk out of it, it's going to prohibit the whole thing. And if it's even sliced even a little bit, that would be fine. Okay? So how do they paskin? So the Mechaber says that if you are roasting the kachal or you salt it with other meat, then those things are the same as with the liver, which we said in the halacha originally. And we say that there's those who permit it. Fine. The Ramah says, don't do that. Okay? And even b'diavad, you shouldn't do that. But however you did, it's mutter. Okay? And that's the Sefer Isra Aruch. And then we also mentioned that the Or HaKeva, the skin around the outside of the stomach, so once you remove all the fat from around it, the milk from around it, and you wash it out, you can salt that with other meat as well, and it's not considered kachal at all. Okay, so the Mechaber and Mechaber Ma side with the Rashba for the most part, that Sili and Malicha are the same, and so therefore you should try not to put them together lechatchila. Okay, and so the Mechaber seems to take that approach, and then he doesn't like the rush at all. Okay, so the question is, what if you did a little bit of slicing according to the Mechaber? So according to the Mechaber, if you slice it even a little bit, then that should be permitted to be with other types of meat. So even though that's not clear according to the Rashba, that should be fine. But for the Rosh and Tosfos, they wouldn't seem to like that. But he might be lenient like that as well. And the Ramah seems to also take the approach of the Rashba. However, he does say you still shouldn't put them together, and that according to the Ramah, you shouldn't salt them together with other meat at all, and that's why we don't do that. Okay. The Shach writes the following. He says the following. He says that the Marshal says that one should not salt the meat with the kachal, whether it's above it or below it. Okay, and if you did, the Marshal also says that you need to slice it lengthwise and widthwise. Okay, but a small tear he wouldn't permit. Okay. And the reason why is because he seems to imply that other Rishonim seem to take that approach. Okay, fine. So that's what he says. The Madnei Shulchan, in discussing this, says that there's a difference between roasting it, which seems to be fine, make it right in, right? So if the kachal is on the bottom, or salting it, which seems to be more strict, a little bit more strict. And it says the problem is probably due to the fact that when you're roasting something, when you lay it on the fire, and then you lay something else on top of it, as opposed to, when you're salting it, they kind of get one from the other. So there's, they're like they kind of move one to the other and not on the other one. So that seems to be why there's some stringency there. Okay, and so therefore we also see that according to these opinions that we can also be lenient with the skin of the outside layer of the stomach. Okay, when you shech that animal, and that seems to be where there's some leniency for it. All right, and so therefore we see from over here some really interesting laws wrapping up kachal. Okay, so that's really the end of the story over here. So let's just kind of go over what we learned over here, a little bit about the salting and the roasting. Okay, so according to the Mechaber, one could go ahead and roast the meat with the kachal on it. Okay, and if it was salted correctly, the Ramah seems to agree that technically you could do that, but he says our halacha is not to do that. Okay. So we also know that that's for roasting. For salting, we also know that you can't roast that. You also can't put them together. So if you did, it would be mutter. And according to the Ramah, if you do a full slicing, you shouldn't roast them together. Okay, even though you were careful to put one next to the other. But the Mechaber would say that as long as it's permitted, once you rip it open, it would be permitted. However, since we take our shpudim, we put them sideways, right? We take our skewers, put them sideways for roasting them, and we keep flipping them side to side. So we really shouldn't be permitting that one way or another. Okay, even though the Mechaber himself says that if you did that, that would seem to be fine. Okay. And it wouldn't be the shput that would osher them; it would be the drippings. Okay, and the Ramah says therefore the salting shouldn't be done with the kachal on top of other meat at all. Okay, even if you slice it open, and even try to switch it, that shouldn't work. Okay, and the Mechaber seems to agree that that's the case as well. The Pri Megadim says that the the Pri Megadim says that if the, let's see, I have a note over here that doesn't make any sense. All right, never mind. Okay, and then we talked about the skin of the stomach. So we're permitted to go ahead and treat that like regular meat and not like kachal. So that's what we learned from this, and we will pick up next time with more laws about transferring flavor when pieces of meat touch each other and one's on top, one's on the bottom. So we will continue learning these wonderful new things as we progress to Siman Sadi Aleph. Thank you for joining, and we'll learn again next time.